Become a member, sign in, and start streaming today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the February 19th, 2021 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. As I've always said about the show, if you could catch the first 5 minutes that we can't legally air, it's always the most interesting. I'm really saddened that we couldn't share the first 5 minutes of this one, but trust me, you missed one heck of a show. But we think we can probably deliver another great 26 minutes right here. We're going to give it our best shot. First up, Governor Jared Polis delivered his State of the State address on Wednesday. In the speech, Governor Polis highlighted his proposed changes to the state budget, including 2 healthcare reform bills, broadband access in rural areas, and better roads. He also announced the proposal of a $1 billion economic stimulus package to help Colorado businesses recover from the pandemic. Patty Calhoun from Westward. We've covered a lot about COVID, and certainly Governor Polis covered a lot of COVID in the speech. Was there anything else that stood out to you as noteworthy?
Well, you did promise me a COVID-free first item, and of course you could not avoid COVID if you're talking about the state of the state. I think Jared Polis gave a good reasoned speech. He gave some interesting quotes. He quoted from Ecclesiastes. He did have to talk about COVID, and he talked about a lot of the heroes of the pandemic, the first responders, the people who have kept life in Colorado that we love going as close as it can be to the state we love. I thought he did a very good job. He will have probably less trouble than Congress working on his economic stimulus plan. He is going to have some fights with the 2 houses, both being under Democrats, but the issue is not going to be so much where people are on the progressive scale. It's going to be where they are on the budget, because he still has to have a balanced budget in the state. So you cannot go hog wild as you come up with proposals. We'll see something on transportation. It's going to be hard to predict exactly how it'll come out, but I do think we will see that stimulus package. He didn't talk about the unemployment snafus, which are major and will definitely take up a lot of time over the next few months.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. State of the State speeches, like State of the Union speeches, are just a speech. I mean, we get something from them, but Governor Polis seemed to stay on brand, putting not only Ecclesiastes, but I think Jean-Luc Picard, so that's kind of his thing. Yeah. Beyond those quotations, did we get anything of value from the speech?
Well, one thing, even in the theatrical sense, one thing of value, this was started by Reagan, I think, in his 1982 or so State of the Union, is bringing in different American heroes, calling them out, having them stand up. And Governor Polis had a good collection of heroes. And one of them was Larimer County Sheriff Justin Smith, who was outstanding. The sheriffs are the chief fire wardens in their counties, and Sheriff Smith worked very hard and effectively in fighting the fires. And Sheriff Smith is also a outspoken conservative Republican who disagrees with Governor Polis on a lot of policy issues. That's a different approach than Governor Hickenlooper took in the past, who when Smith sued him over his gun bans, Hickenlooper absolutely just put him as public enemy number 1. So that was a nice change in tone. As the governor said, there's a structural deficit in the state, in my view, caused by excessive spending. But he says, even though we got a structural deficit, he wants to do this $1 billion stimulus package. And I think happily, leadership on both sides, House Speaker Garnett and Senator Bob Rankin from Carbondale, is saying, no, before we go on a spending spree of new stuff, put back the money that we borrowed in the first place, like from the public employees' retirement accounts, and from the other cash funds, which are supposed to be segregated funds to pay for specific things. Those things ought to be fixed before we worsen the deficit by new spending.
Natasha Gardner, freelance journalist, joins us again. Natasha, it's great to have you on the show. You know, Governor Polis has been pretty influential when it comes to guiding the legislature. Different governors decide how they're going to show their influence with the legislature. He seemed to be fairly influential. Did we get any signs from his speech that show where he might want the legislature to go this session?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the biggest, or one of the biggest points of these type of speeches, is to set some priorities for the coming months. In this case, the overarching conversation will be the question of the budget. Now, we're going to get some more information about that in March, about the forecast of where things are at. We do know that things weren't maybe as bad as we initially thought. And I'm thinking back to those optimistic days of last April and May, where there are lots of news stories about, what kind of alphabet soup recovery will we have? Will it look like a V or will it look like a W? Well, we still don't know what that letter is, but we do know more about how the impact of the first half of this crisis, the economic crisis related to the pandemic, has looked. And so the governor and the legislatures will have to address that. One key thing that I heard him mention, which I think I'm going to keep a close eye on, is access to broadband. This has been a topic for years. And certainly in this pandemic, we have seen how vital access to internet is for students attending school. I mean, even something like the census and having access to that for people to fill it out in a quick and timely fashion. There's so many things that need broadband access at this point that it has become such an essential part of our day-to-day, much like roads or clean water or electricity is. So I'm going to keep an eye on that one. I think we'll be hearing more about that throughout the session.
And rounding out the panel, joining us remotely, Penfield Tate, attorney with Tate Law. Thanks for being here, Penn. As a former state lawmaker, you have, I'm not sure the right word's endured, but you have witnessed quite a few State of the State addresses. How did this one rank, and what do lawmakers need to take away from this, if anything?
I think Governor Polis does a good job with his State of the State addresses. And he does probably as well as any governor I've seen what the General Assembly really wants, and that is a clear signal or indication about what his priorities are, what he wants to work on, so that lets you get a sense of the parameters in terms of what's going to drive the legislative agenda. Every one of the 100 legislators has, got the ability to introduce 5 bills, and so you've got potentially 500 different points of interest. But most of them die in committee. And clearly what the governor wants to do is going to be front and center because he has the one vote on the first floor. It's 33 in the House, 18 in the Senate, and 1 on the first floor to get something done. So his one vote is important. One thing I do agree on that's going to be important to watch, and it's the point Natasha raised. It's interesting how what goes around comes around. 30 years ago, Roy Romer proposed a concept of the state actually investing in either a fiber network or something that would have brought better access to rural Colorado to be able to get on the information highway. And Republicans who controlled the legislature then thought it was too expensive, thought that government shouldn't be involved in that, and wanted to leave it to the private sector after we'd already seen the private sector was not willing in making that investment in certain communities. So it'll be interesting to see how that travels in session.
The Colorado State Justice Department has found itself in the spotlight as it responds to allegations of sexism, misconduct, and harassment. On Thursday, State Supreme Court Chief Justice Brian Boatwright delivered an emotional speech vowing to make any changes necessary in order to help rebuild trust in the branch's leadership. David, we start with you on this one. What did you think of Chief Justice Boatwright's comments and the work that has to get done?
Well, the words were fine. Let's see about the actions. Part of this comes out of a employee, the former chief of staff for the state court administrator's office, who says, I'm going to blow the whistle on 20 cases of sexual harassment and misconduct and things like that. And she ends up instead not blowing the whistle, but she got a $2.75 million conduct to do training within the judicial branch. Senate Minority Leader Chris Holbert, I think, struck the right tone or said the right thing by saying that the justices in their independent review that they're trying to set up should not try to solve it top down. They should try to get information from the rank and file working people, the entry level employees. This is symptomatic of a long-standing problem in Colorado of the judiciary shutting itself off from public scrutiny. Colorado is one of the worst states in the country for public access to court records, and that was upheld recently in a unanimous decision by the Colorado Supreme Court. And so now for the third year in in a row, Representative Polly Lawrence is sponsoring a bill to make sure that all court administrative and budget records do fully come under the Open Records Act.
Natasha, let's follow up with you on this one. As a freelance journalist, a long-time journalist here in Colorado, do you think there's going to be more openness from the judicial branch in Colorado?
Well, I think time will tell on that particular issue. It certainly seems like there should be, and kudos to the Denver Post for reporting on this story, which has been revealing itself over the last several days and into weeks, but also something they've been working on for years. So for them to continue to follow this, to look into it, and to bring it to light, it's so important. I think at any day we probably could all use a refresher on civics, but the last 4 months in particular seems like a day-to-day lesson on the importance of how this country is founded and how our parts of the government work together and how we also maintain and ensure and improve upon those systems. I think this is a moment for Colorado to look at what's happening currently and to make some changes. Because yes, this is about fixing what may have gone wrong, but also making a better system for the future. So hopefully, as they go through this independent investigation, we can do that, both repair what has happened in whatever way that we can, but also look towards building a better system.
Penn, before the show we were talking, I didn't have any idea that the Chief Justice comes out every year to have his or her own version of State of the State address. You have actually seen them as a former lawmaker. What did you think of Chief Justice Boatwright's comments? And also, I guess the work that has to get done, is this a bigger problem than we may realize at this point?
There is the State of the Judiciary address annually before the legislature after the State of the State. So we've seen chief justices give this address year after year. Typically, it focuses on their legislative priorities and their budgetary priorities. Natasha raises a good point about the civics aspect of this. Remember that the judicial branch is the third co-equal branch of government, both in a state and nationally, with the executive and the legislative. So, the executive implements laws, the legislative passes them, but the judiciary interprets the laws that are passed and put into place. So their role is vital. David's correct. The judicial branch is typically one that does not operate with a lot of transparency. But I thought the Chief Justice did what he had to do and deal with this very candidly and say, we have problems, we need to fix them. Depending upon the depth of the investigation, from what I'm hearing, there are also going to be issues about hiring practices within the judicial department, a lack of diversity within both the administrative offices, and there's always been an issue about a lack of diversity on our various benches and courts around the state. So I think judicial branch is going to be in the headlights for quite a while here.
Patty, Westford's done more than their fair share of open records requests. Do you think we're going to get more openness from the judicial branch now that we've heard from Chief Justice Boatwright?
Probably, but they'll do it kicking and screaming. Let's continue the civics lesson. So you're talking about the three branches of government, then the fourth estate. David referred to the good work by the Denver Post, and Natasha did too. David Magoya has been following this for so long, and the fact is he got access to a memo that if he hadn't been at the Denver Post, if he hadn't been there for a long time, had these relationships, this story might not have broken. The Denver Gazette has been following it too, but really kudos to the Post, which is still going through a hard time. We see Alden Global just wound up buying the Tribune, and of course that's reminding everyone of just how decimated the Denver Post newsroom has become, and somehow Alden had enough money to buy the Tribune, where it'll probably do the same thing. So we have to recognize when journalists are out there doing great work, we would never have heard about this if Magoya hadn't been on that story for so long.
It appears Denver Mayor Michael Hancock is off the hook regarding his Thanksgiving travels, at least when it comes to the ethics complaint filed recently. This week, the Denver Board of Ethics voted unanimously to dismiss the complaint filed against Hancock for traveling to see family shortly after advising citizens to stay home. Natasha, we start with you on this one. Yes, the ethics complaint is over. I'm sure Mayor Hancock is happy to see that. But is this a part of his legacy that he will not be able to shake regardless of an ethics complaint decision?
Yes, I think Denverites will remember this as a moment during this pandemic that is definitely historic. I think that on a political spectrum, Ted Cruz and Michael Hancock couldn't be further apart, except on the issue of taking personal travel in the middle of a pandemic. Senator Ted Cruz, of course, made the other poor choice of doing that when his state was in a complete crisis. So I guess they're slightly different, but this is turning into something that seems to be repeated, where politicians say, do what I say, but not what I do. And that is something I do think that the constituents that they represent care about. I don't think it was a huge surprise that the ethics board looked at this and said, looking strictly at the rules as they're listed, this isn't a violation, but they were clear to say that they did not condone the travel as well. So I don't think that this is something that Denverites will forget anytime soon.
Penn, is this issue over for Mayor Hancock?
I think it's over in the sense that his time in office is almost up, but I think it sets the stage in terms of how people view things. We talked about this before when it first came down, and I think we all agreed it probably wasn't an ethics violation, but what it was is what, the mayor admitted to. It was, profound bad judgment. And unfortunately, Denver citizens have seen too much profound bad judgment, both with this personal travel, both with the Great Hall project that was doomed from the start. And after 3 years and multi-millions of dollars, the administration acknowledged it just didn't have the competence or aptitude to pull the project off. And now with the scuttling of a major part of the National Western Project that was hailed as was going to be one of the legacies of this administration, and now it's being challenged also. And it just tells, people just continue to wonder, how can the city keep surviving with so much exercise of bad judgment?
Patty, does this decision at least clear the way to focus on other issues, or does it linger for a while?
No, I mean, it's going to linger forever. This is going to be what people remember Michael Hancock for the most part in this state, unless he does something that's more stupid. I mean, this is it was unforgivable in a city and a state where people were making so many sacrifices because of the pandemic. And the fact that that tweet went out reminding everyone to stay home right before he got on his plane in the airport that has been incredibly screwed up for the last, many years, as Penn pointed out, people are going to remember that. They just do not forget. And it's not like this is a little blip. Everyone had a cold for a week. We're going on a year with this pandemic, and people are just not going to forget.
David, sadly, there seems to be a growing Hall of Fame, at least in this current time period, of politicians finding their way into situations like this. I saw a tweet that said, had Mayor Hancock apologizing for this, and then Ted Cruz saying, "Hold my boarding pass," as he does his situation. So, is this something that lingers, and the things that we'll be talking about when it comes to Mayor Hancock moving forward?
Well, at least Ted Cruz didn't say don't go to Mexico because it's too dangerous. It's not a violation of the ethics code to be completely hypocritical and incompetent. But what he did was at least a violation of the spirit of the ethics code, which states that its intent is for city employees to act with high levels of ethical conduct, honesty, integrity, and accountability, so that the public will have confidence that persons in positions of public responsibility are acting for the benefit of the public. If he actually believed his words about how dangerous air travel supposedly is, then he wouldn't have endangered his security detail by having them escort him to the airport.
Let's get a quick take on this last one. The city of Denver is facing another lawsuit, this time from a man who lost an eye during the George Floyd protest last summer. His injury occurred when he was shot in the face by a non-lethal police projectile. The city has now faced more than 5 claims for injuries to protesters caused by excessive force. Penn, we start with you on this one. Do you see a settlement coming out of this? I mean, we've seen that a lot from the city of Denver, but this being the 5th one, I don't know how many of these they can really endure. What do you think are the next steps we'll see?
Dominic, I think we'll see a settlement, and it's just the continuation of a disturbing trend. During this administration, how many excessive force cases have we seen settled or resolved, and most of which could have and should have been avoided, not just with better training, but with the exercise of common sense. So this is a recurrent theme. We even saw a journalist who was assaulted in front of City Hall for taking a picture of how the police were dealing with an unhoused person. So this will be settled. It just shows that the exercise of bad judgment, when it's exhibited at the top, sort of filters through the rest of city operations.
Patty, 5 claims aren't a dozen, but it's not nothing. There's something here. Do you think this might be just a tip of an iceberg for us?
Well, we still have a few months in which those can be filed. If you looked at Nick Mitchell's, the independent monitor who just left Denver, but his report that he looked into the first 5 days of protests and the responses, and there's no question that there were problems in the Denver Police Department that led to the ability to do this kind of thing. They had a lot of people helping from different law enforcement agencies. They weren't under the same rules. They didn't actually know they don't know, I think, who fired this. But these protesters were kneeling, and this guy got hit in the eye by an allegedly less lethal munition that should never have been shot off. So we will see a settlement in this. We'll probably see a few more suits coming in, too.
David, do you think we'll see more suits like this moving forward?
As the others say, very, very possibly. But this one, I think you can tell, is a pretty solid suit because one of the plaintiff's lawyers is Matthew Crone, who's a very experienced and respected civil rights attorney who's won a lot of big verdicts. And kudos to Channel 7, by the way, for linking to the actual complaint so people could see it. And according to that complaint, there was no aggression going on by the protesters in the group that Mr. Strong was in when he was shot. A complication in this is that the complaint itself says, actually, we don't know, not only do we not know the particular officer who fired it, but he probably was not even necessarily working for the Denver Police Department because it was a type of munition that Denver Police Department doesn't use. So it might have been somebody from Aurora.
Natasha, wrap it up for us. Do you think we're going to see maybe even a different response from the city of Denver when it deals with these kinds of issues?
Yes, I think so. And I think that's what the department is working towards. And hopefully and rightfully so, that should be what happened. I mean, this has sort of been a theme today is how do we improve this country and this state and this city? And this is something that mistakes were made and they need to be fixed so that these situations don't occur in the future. On a broader scope, I just also want to point out that what happened this summer with the protests, with the Black Lives Matters movement after George Floyd's murder, those situations, what led to those moments, have not been resolved. We haven't come to a point where we have solutions in place in our country where we're really have addressed these concepts. So if anything, these continuing conversations helps bring it to the forefront to make sure that the reasons that they were there protesting that night and over those days and over those weeks do not need to continue to happen.
Well, let's get through our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. As always, Patty, please start us off.
Well, return to the legislature, where today Representative Holtorf told Tom Sullivan, whose son was killed at the Aurora Theater shootings, essentially to get over it.
David.
The legislature has a bill to crack down on the county commissioners by saying that a county board of public health, its leaders can never be fired unless they neglect their duties. So they would, in a sense, be immune from the control of the elected people of the county. And it would likewise say that in small counties where the health board duties are often performed by commissioners themselves, that would be prohibited again. The bottom line of that is the Colorado Department of Health, which has only limited authority to issue orders, depends on the counties to use their actual legal authority to duplicate and carry out what the Department of Health wants. And since they won't go along with a big brother, there's an attempt to in some ways unconstitutionally, perhaps, crack down on county autonomy.
Natasha, we go to you for your Disgrace of the Week.
Yes, on January 29th, Governor Polis released some adjustments to the vaccine rollout, including some moves that were very much lauded in the press, as rightfully so. I'm not here to argue those. Personally, I hope that everyone has equitable access to the vaccine as soon as possible. My concern were with some of the groups that were both pushed down and, in fact, removed. There used to be more general immunosuppressed group that was included in the vaccine rollout. That's no longer there. It's been replaced by more specific conditions, but there are many conditions that aren't listed there. And as a journalist who asks a lot of questions, I can't help but do that. And I have questions about what happens to a family that has an immunosuppressed child. What happens to someone who's been battling cancer but finished their treatments in December? What happens to somebody who has a lung disease that's not listed on the list right there now? I hope that this is a work in progress and that they will continue to address some of those groups that may not be currently listed, but that would benefit from early access to the vaccine.
Penn, we go to you next.
I think this falls into the category of bad judgment, but to State Representative Ron Hanks, who was, to my knowledge, the only Colorado elected official who went to Washington, D.C. to participate in what became the riot, to stand with the supporters of the former president. Just not a good look, and I think it'll have ongoing repercussions this legislative session.
Time to say something nice about somebody. Patty?
Nick Murder, who took into his own hands, which the state hasn't been able to do. He created Vaccine Finder for all the people who are having so much trouble finding appointments. There may not be any open, but at least you'll know.
David?
There's a nonprofit in Colorado Springs called the Independence Center, and they are distributing masks that have a clear space in them so that someone you're talking to can see your lips move. And that is great for people who are hard of hearing or deaf. And it's also actually great for teachers who are teaching students who have learning disabilities where the audio isn't enough for them, and being able to see the face helps a lot.
Here. Natasha?
Well, the groundhog saw his shadow earlier this month, and so did the Mars rover, Perseverance. I mean, talk about a major win. I think anyone loves some good news right now, but this is such an incredible feat. So congratulations to everyone involved with sending the Perseverance to Mars.
Here. Penn, we go to you.
Just a shout out to a number of the nonprofits in our community, particularly a number of the churches who have worked with the state and other health organizations to get allocations of the vaccine, and have been working through their own independent networks, whether it be their parishioners or friends of their parishioners, to get the vaccine distributed as quickly as possible to as many people as possible. It's not something they had to do, but the fact that they stood up and decided it needed to be done, and they're following through with it, is something that should be commended.
Well, for some of our audience, it's a disgrace of the week. For some of our audience, it's to say something nice. But Rush Limbaugh's passing reminded me that way back in the early 90s, the Rush Limbaugh television show was actually something that was on KBDI, PBS 12 back then, and we actually had T-shirts because we pledged it, because, well, why not? A legacy, love him or hate him, certainly a legacy that is undeniable as we go into what is now completely affected in a different time than it was in the early 90s. For everybody here at PBS 12 and Colorado Inside Out, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night.